found Reddit a good resource recently, and while I was reading through posts on why guitarists want to learn music theory, it becomes clear that all of them want to become better at guitar playing or want to develop as a musician. There wasn't a single post of a beginner wanting to start straight away with music theory, but would they be better off to do so? Wikipedia says music theory is about the fundamentals of music, so pitch, scales, modes, consonants, dissonance, rhythm, melody, and a lot more. I'd say most guitarists would be interested in scales, modes, rhythm, melody, chords, and notation. Now let's follow a typical guitarist learning path and find out if you would be better off learning music theory straight away or not. Now the first thing that you would learn is the open strings. So Eddie A, Dynamite, Goodbye Eddie. You already know that, right? So for me, that's not music theory. That's just naming those things here. That's like saying your guitar has a sound hole, your guitar has a neck. So that's just for the sake of communication. But it would be too much to explain what the intervals from string to string are. So perfect fourth, major third, and then a perfect fourth. And then I would go on and explain what intervals are. It would also be too much if I said to you, the open strings have a range of 2 octaves, and I would go on and explain what an octave is. That would be too much. It would also be too much to tell you that all strings are within the key of C or within the key of G, and I would go on and explain what a key is and why they are in C and G and not in the other ones. So all that would be too much. So by holding back some theoretical information here, we make sure that every beginner can keep up with it. Now, following the typical learning path of a guitarist, the next thing we would learn would be the cowboy chords. So all open major and minor chords that use as many open strings as possible. And there are only 8. So this is E major, A major, D major, G major, C major, and then E minor, A minor, and D minor. If you don't know those 8 by now, it's worth learning them. And here it would be absolutely too much if I told you what a triad is, how you build those chords. It would be too much if I said to you, this is E major, but you have to learn the note names E, B, E, G sharp, B, and E. And then for your next chord, let's say G major, you have to learn totally different note names, which seem to be random and just unrelated for a beginner. And at that stage, it would be totally too much if I told you about the relationships of chords here. If I said G's are tonic now, and D's are dominant, and C's are subdominant, and then we play the next song and I say C's are a tonic now, and G's are a dominant. So that would seem totally random. Now you got a few chords down. The next thing that you need is some rhythm, some strumming patterns here. And here I would, with as little explanation as possible, just play something for my student and listen to it a few times and then try to copy it. And here it would be too much to talk about what a beat is, that there are different time signatures, or that you have to count like 1 and 2 and 3. That's just too much for someone who never did something like it. Or if I told you about the subdivisions, that you're playing 8th notes and what subdivisions there are, that's just too much. It's enough to get that motion down, to get that strumming straight here. That's plenty to do. Now the next thing would be to have notation of some kind, because for most adults it gets quickly to a point where you can't remember all the things that you've learned. You can't remember the chord shapes, you can't remember the strumming patterns, so you need some notation. And it's for a reason that we have so many different options here on the guitar next to standard musical notation. So we have, for example, the chord diagrams that are just easy to read for most people. For those chord shapes here, we have like arrows for strumming patterns that are easy to follow for most people. We have tabs, that's very popular, so you exactly know where to put your fingers on the fretboard because of the fret numbers that you read. You don't know which finger though, you don't know the rhythm in most cases, but you know where to put your fingers. And of course we have standard musical notation. And for me at that stage, learning to read standard musical notation is just too much. It's just an extra thing. If you're still excited about the guitar and you want to learn to play the guitar, that is something that would hinder you because it just takes too much time and too much practice to fully understand and then to read it, let alone read it in time. If you see something like that, it just takes forever as a beginner to find out that it's just an E major chord. The next thing on that typical learning path of a guitarist would be to play a melody. It could be, for example, happy birthday, someone's birthday is coming up and you want to play happy birthday, because you realize when you play those chords here, it doesn't sound like happy birthday. It doesn't sound like anything because it's not the melody, it's just the chord, it's just a part of the music, but it's not like the main part if you want, so you can recognize it just by chords. So you want to play a melody and you learn that next. And here at that stage, it doesn't make sense to learn those note names. Imagine you're learning a melody of 20 notes, 30 notes. It doesn't make sense to learn those note names because as a beginner, they seem random, unrelated. You don't have any clue what they sound like. And on top of that, you don't know how to do it on the guitar. So you learn names for something that you don't know how to do. Instead, make it practical, know where to put your fingers, learn it by tap. Later on, you can learn the note names. And it would also be too much to tell you about the relationships of notes here within that melody, or if I told you about compositional techniques that are used in that melody. And now it's time to learn the first scale, which is often like the minor pentatonic box here, 5th fret, for example, or with open strings, E minor pentatonic box, or a major scale with open strings, C major, for example. So those are common scales to learn first. And also here, it doesn't make sense to learn those note names first. Learn to play the scale first, get comfortable with it, and then you can learn the note names, because it just seems random here. If I told you here's an A, and here's an A, and here's an A, how does that make sense? All have the same name, but they're all over the place. And then if you learned your note names and then you shifted one fret to the left, and you learn totally different note names here, although the shape looks exactly the same, that doesn't make sense as a beginner. Also, it wouldn't make sense if I told you about the structure of the scale. If I said to you, it'd start with a minor third and then a major second interval, major second, minor third, major second interval. That's just nonsense. That's useless information for a beginner. That's exactly the point where we leave beginner guitar territory and go intermediate. So that's the group of guitarists who post on Reddit, for example, what's the best way to learn music theory, or what music theory is important for guitarists, stuff like that, because they already know a good few things. They know their open chords and maybe a few other chords, 1 or 2 scales. They know some rhythms, some strumming patterns, stuff like that. And now they realize there is more. There are more scales, more chords, more whatever. And I want to make that sense here. I don't know how they are related. I want to know those note names now. And that's where you can bring in music theory. That's also the point where your guitar playing becomes more detailed. Your practice routine becomes more detailed. You set those little goals in your mind, like, I want to be more confident with scales. I want to know which scale matches which chord. I want to play guitar solos. I want to learn about all the modes there are. I want to be more confident with rhythms. I want to learn about what a beat is now, what a time signature is, what time signatures are there, how to play them, what are subdivisions, how can I practice them, the technique behind that, and all that kind of stuff. It's not like here's E major, here's your strumming pattern anymore. If you need any help with your guitar playing, check out highguitar.com, where you can get one-on-one lessons. I understand how frustrating it is to be enthusiastic about guitar playing but not know where to start or what to do next. And that's why every month I help dozens of people just like you to learn guitar quickly, and I'd love to do the same for you. And music theory also helps you to find those amazing chord voicings on the guitar without a lot of trial and error. So the guitar has a unique voice as a chord instrument. And now you realize G is not only like that anymore, it's like that as well. You can play like that or like that, and here's a G, and here's a G, and here's a G, here's a G. Now G is all over the place. If you're not yet at that stage, then keep that in mind for the future. The best way to learn music theory is like that. You learn the C major scale, which is easy. It's like the alphabet, C, D, F, G, A, B, C. That's it. You learn the structure. Get a keyboard. It doesn't need to be expensive. Yes, a more expensive one, you get a better sound, you get a better touch, but you can get one for free from friends, family, small ads, charity shops, stuff like that. It's just for the purpose of learning music theory, because the keyboard is like an open book. Everything's clear on the keyboard, whereas on the guitar, nothing is clear. So you really need a keyboard to understand things. Then you make sense of the C major scale on the keyboard. I'm just looking at my keyboard here all the time. Make sense of the C major scale on the keyboard, and then try to copy that and make it sense on the guitar. Then you play the C major scale on one string, let's say A string for example, and so on. You play it on 2 strings only, and so on. You play it on 3 strings, on 4 strings, and so on. You play the C major scale all over the fretboard, and try to remember where those different fingerings meet. Let's say, for example, you play the C major scale with open strings here, for example, you end up on a C, and this is where you can start like your C scale on played on 2 strings, for example, and you end up on a C again, and try to connect those fingerings. If that starts to feel comfortable, do this exercise here. It's a fantastic exercise. Find one note all over the fretboard. Let's say C, for example. You have C here, you have it here, you have it here. It takes some time at the beginning, but it's really worth it. You know best where you're standing and if it's better to bring in music theory or better keep it practical. Did you know all those guitar devils lurking in the dark? Watch this next.